Hi, it's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com. Here to talk about a fight that, quite frankly, is riveting. And it's Andre Ward against Carl Froch, the finals of the Super 6 on Showtime at 168 pounds. But before I continue, just remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Let me say this. People know that I don't believe that a fighter's personality or drive determines who wins a fight at the championship level. In other words, at the championship level, I believe all of these guys want to win, right? And I believe it comes down to technique, not personality, not charisma. Let me add that a fighter's charisma might impact judges. It shouldn't, right? The judges should be looking at the effectiveness of the blows, the effectiveness of the game plan. Now, all of that said, there are very few fights I've come across that have a more interesting personality dynamic than this fight. And let me just add, both of these guys fully believes that they are the absolute best in the division. Let me also point out that both of these guys go about it differently. And let me say, one of these guys, in my opinion, is one of boxing's best secrets, because the guy, quite frankly, isn't the box office draw that he should be, and he's a natural when it comes to charisma. You know, a fighter can have a lot of talent, like Vladimir Klitschko, for example, but not really have a lot of charisma. I can't name a lot of interviews that Vladimir Klitschko has done where I've actually stopped what I've been doing to listen to the interview, right? And the problem is, even fighters with charisma have some corporate overlay where you know what they're going to say, they're going to be polite, they want to be a man of the people, they have a political angle they're pursuing, and so, you know, they come across corporate. Lucien Bute, I think he's a great fighter. Again, I can't recall an interview where I actually stopped what I was doing to hear what Lucien Bute was going to say, right? I think Manny Pacquiao is very charismatic, but Manny Pacquiao, you know, he's a man of the people, and he, you know, in interviews is going to come across like a nice guy. I don't know that about Carl Froch. And I find Carl Froch to be riveting, right? He, you know, he has an Ali type quality to him that's natural, where he walks in the room, he fills up the room. You know, he and his crew firmly believe that he is unbeaten. I'm sure Carl Froch, if he keeps it real, would tell you he beat Mikhail Kessler, beat him fair and square, and got robbed. I know on the Showtime show he was a bit diplomatic, but on the Showtime show he himself said he didn't think he should lose his title on that fight, right? Now, Froch, there's something about Froch. It's an interesting dynamic where he's not politically correct, right? When he gives an interview, it's always interesting. He's not just talking trash. He's actually not trying to be arrogant. He's actually trying to be honest. And he definitely has a track record. I mean, definitely has a track record of not only fighting the best, and understand, before the Super 6 tournament, he took on an unbeaten Jean Pascal. He followed that up by coming to the United States to take on Jermaine Taylor, right? That's before the tournament, in which he's taken on Andre Durrell, Arthur Abraham, Glenn Johnson. Now he's taking on Andre Ward, right? This guy wants to fight the very best. He believes that he is the best. He has a certain flavor that fills up the room, and it's not just him. It's his entire crew, right? Even his woman, even his wife has an interesting flavor going on where they come in, they're brash, they'll curse, they're not politically correct. Carl Froch is not trying to be a role model for your children. He's just trying to be an athlete, and the confidence comes across, right? Carl Froch to me is riveting. I'm surprised that he hasn't yet broken into major box office success like, let's say, a Miguel Cotto, great guy but a corporate guy. I'm surprised Carl Froch hasn't caught on with the fans like them. He's a natural, right? By contrast, Andre Ward. Let me just say this. Andre Ward to me is a phenomenal talent. I believe he knows he's a phenomenal talent. He's a technician's technician. But Andre Ward has chosen instead to try to actively not fill up the room. In other words, he's not trying to be Ali. He's trying to be the non-Ali, right? He's a family man. His nickname is Son of God, right? He gives all praise to Jesus Christ, right? Andre Ward, as he likes to say, doesn't want to talk about it. He just has to show you, right? And I think Andre Ward knows that he's one of the most complete packages in the sport. I like to tell the story that I was looking at an Andre Ward video and trying to research a fight. I thought, oh, Andre Ward is left-handed. Then, of course, as I was watching the video, he flipped back to orthodox and was equally coordinated, right? Ward, how do you put it? He doesn't run in a fight, he deconstructs. And, let's talk about it. First, let's talk about Carl Froch. Let me just say this about Carl Froch. Carl Froch is a late bloomer. You know this guy, right? When you first see him, he was raw. Understand, he didn't get into the sport until his 20s, right? Very different than Andre Ward, very different. Early on, he could only do a few things. He always had a great jab. He has one of boxing's best, most accurate uppercuts. Only flashes it when he needs it, right? But early on, you knew where he was going to be. He was going to be right in front of you. He was going to try to feint on you. His defense consisted of just moving his head, right? He kept his hands low. Take a look at the Pascal film. It's fascinating. Pascal comes in. Pascal has power and hand speed. And yet Carl Froch is just trying to roll with the punches. Doesn't even put his hands up by, let's say, the 6th round. He's literally just trying to roll with the punches, right? Very lackadaisical style. Now, the Carl Froch I see is one of the most advanced fighters in the sport, right? Carl Froch now seems to understand spacing and tempo and timing. In my opinion, even though officially he lost to Miguel Kessler, he is a much more advanced fighter than Miguel Kessler. If you look at the Carl Froch who fought Arthur Abraham, you're going to see a guy who you didn't know where he was going to be in the ring, right? I believe that the fighters who always come forward are limited, right? More advanced fighters, particularly a fighter with the jab that Carl Froch has, and it's a great jab, right? It's a stiff jab, right? A fighter with a stiff jab who can confuse you on whether he's in front of you, 2 feet away, 3 feet away, 1 foot away. That fighter really has a lot going for him. And Carl Froch's game is subtle, right? He knows how to jab you. He knows how to hook you. He's not blessed with fast hands. But yet, against a pursuer like a Glenn Johnson, he was able to back up most of that fight and literally keep Glenn Johnson at the end of a jab. Then when Johnson got inside, Carl was able to pirouette away after throwing hard hooks to the body. Right? This guy is what I call adaptive reactive. He makes adjustments. Right? He is a much better fighter right now than he was at the beginning of the tournament. And it's interesting, Carl Froch's image is that of a guy with a big punch. But I need for you to realize that he hasn't knocked anyone out since KOing Jermaine Taylor. Think about it. This is a guy who has been deconstructing guys with technique. And the technique always has him on the outside. In other words, he doesn't like to fight inside. He doesn't like to grab you and grapple with you. Right? This is a guy whose premier punch, the punch he's most comfortable with, is literally a very stiff jab. Right? And so Froch is getting by subtle moves where he figures out that when you throw a punch, he can get by with his shoulder as a defense, right? He's literally borrowed from Roy Jones Jr. When he stands across from you, you're going to see that his left hand, his lead hand, is dangling below his waist. That's a Roy Jones Jr. move, right? He's daring you to jump inside. If you try to, he's going to hit you with the left hook. But he's going to keep you outside with a jab, right? If you get sloppy and try to just stay away from the jab and come inside kamikaze, he has an excellent right uppercut that can almost decapitate you. He's kind of like Devin Alexander in terms of having a great uppercut if you break through his defense, right? Here's why I think Carl Froch loses the fight. In fact, I'll go further. Here's why I think Andre Ward wins this fight by several rounds, right? Andre Ward is a chameleon. He can fight more fight styles than Carl Froch, right? Andre Ward is a guy who, quite frankly, has figured things out and literally only shows you what he has to in a fight, right? He's equally comfortable fighting a Mikhail Kessler as he is a Sakio Bika, who people forget he beat during the tournament. Think about it. During the Showtime tournament, he took a fight outside of the tournament, and he chose one of the toughest guys at 168 pounds, and quite frankly, he made it look easy. Right? Andre Ward, when he fought Arthur Abraham, in the beginning was rough. Abraham came forward on Ward. Ward seemed unprepared in the beginning of that fight. But Ward dominated the fight, and interestingly enough, after dominating that fight, Nonito Donaire goes into his dressing room. This is right on the Showtime show, Fight Camp 360. Nonito Donaire goes in his dressing room, congratulates his good friend Andre Ward, and Ward, who's smiling, is upset. Ward didn't think he looked that good. Now, it's hard to look as good as Ward looked in the 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th rounds of that fight, right? Ward was thinking back. This is how his mind works. He was thinking back to the beginning of the fight where Arthur Abraham came in, surprised him, and was able to land some hooks, right? I believe Ward's memory is near photographic. You don't get to the level that Andre Ward is at, where you can fight outside, you can fight inside, you can, roll with punches, you can shift to southpaw, you can fight Mikhail Kessler outside for most of the fight, dominate him, come inside, dominate him, literally make him look like he's immobile in the ring. Mikael Kessler is a good point of reference for these two fighters, right? Take a look at Carl Froch's fight against Mikael Kessler. You're going to see that Kessler gave Froch all he can handle. And keep in mind, Froch is much more advanced than Kessler, right? Kessler comes in, you know Kessler is going to come in on Froch, and Kessler still had success coming in. Now contrast that with Andre Ward's fight against Mikael Kessler, where quite frankly, it didn't even make a difference if Mikael Kessler came in, right? When he came inside, Andre Ward's a better inside fighter than Mikael Kessler, right? Boxing's like a chain. The weakest link can unravel your entire game plan. I don't believe Carl Froch will know what to do when Andre Ward gets inside on him, as he did Edison Miranda in the later rounds, as he did Alan Green the entire fight, right? Carl Froch, in preparing for this fight, has been sparring with Peter Quillin. You know, Peter Quillin's an athlete. I don't think Peter Quillin knows how to fight inside, right? Froch, I'm sure, is going to try to keep Andre Ward outside using his stiff jab, right? Understand, whereas Glenn Johnson tried to punch his way in, Andre Ward is sophisticated enough where he doesn't even have to punch his way in to get by a jab, right? Ward is savvy. Ward's also a master at tempo. Ward is savvy. He'll figure out how, in between punches, he can literally just step inside on you. He does it so thoroughly that I would say the only guy in the sport, in my opinion, who can get inside as easily as Andre Ward is probably Timothy Bradley. Not surprisingly, both of those guys are always accused of headbutts. So I'm expecting, as much as I like Carl Froch's charisma, and he certainly looks like the boxer you want to have a beer with, but I'm expecting Andre Ward to make this fight one-sided starting in about the fourth round. Right? I think he'll be able to literally fight this fight off Carl Froch's chest in a way that Glenn Johnson couldn't. And he'll also cut the ring off on Carl Froch in a way that Glenn Johnson didn't. Right? Glenn Johnson, you saw in the Lucien Bute fight, had a problem with lateral movement. Right? As he stepped in, fighters like Bute, fighters like Carl Froch, would step to the side and hit him with jabs. They would keep Glenn Johnson turning, and they would pepper him with jabs. You can't do that against Andre Ward. Let me point out, too, that I don't want to overstate Andre Ward's ability to fight inside, because Andre Ward is a hell of an outside fighter as well. And we saw a fight that I still believe Carl Froch lost when he fought Andre Durrell. And quite frankly, Andre Durrell from the outside made Carl Froch look limited, right? Because Carl Froch is not blessed with great hand speed, right? So if Carl Froch can't set the table using a jab, and if he ends up trying to box you, he's going to be at a hand speed advantage outside to Andre Ward, who can literally mimic Andre Durrell, his good friend, if he needs to. Right? You know, Andre Ward, all I could say is think of boxing as a collection of languages. Think of each style as a language, right? Andre Ward is multilingual. He's the guy in the Spanish restaurant who speaks a little Spanish. He's in the French restaurant, he speaks a little French. He's in the Japanese restaurant, he speaks Japanese. Then later you find out he actually knows Spanish, French, and Japanese culture as well. You know the type. Very high IQ, keeps a low profile. He is a boxing genius. I like Andre Ward in this fight. I'm expecting Ward to win by a margin. Keep in mind, Carl Froch hit the canvas against Jermaine Taylor. Don't be surprised if Ward doesn't open up a lead and then try to close the show late. I like Andre Ward to win this one by a few rounds. Let me know what you think. Leave your comments for me here on YouTube. Visit us at gamblersadvisory.com. Thanks for watching.